We're going to have a really interesting thing. I know that most of you in the audience are Canadian, and I know that you spend a lot of time seeking funding. And yesterday, Liz Rosenthal gave a presentation on a project that had 16 funders, and that was done here by Xenophil. And it was like, oh my God, you know, I'd rather spend that time writing than writing applications. So very quickly, we have Gary Hayes from StoryLabs US. And Gary, just quickly, I guess we're going to go one at a time, and you'll see the videos that we have, and then you'll get to know our guests. So Gary, unfortunately, your Shockwave file, none of us could get to work. So can you tell us all the power that you have in Australia, because you are one of Australia's power players?
Okay. I recently spent 2 years at the ABC, which is Australia's main public service broadcaster. And since 2005 in Australia as well, I've been running incubator development labs. So originally Laboratory for Advanced Media Production between 2005 and 2010. And now I run StoryLabs, which is a similar model. But you want sort of background to the funding in Australia as well, or just an introduction to me?
Well, just an introduction to you, because we're going to get into that in a minute.
Okay, yeah. So, and I've spent a few years in the States working with commercial entities, and 8 years at the BBC as well, working a lot on their commercial arm into foreign territories as well. So I suppose I've got three-headed hat here. One of them is sort of more altruistic, lab-based development of properties and funding. Public service broadcasting is the second hat, and also in commercial entities as well, having been in digital agencies for quite a few years and having to get production funding for projects.
Great. Just as a personal side note, if you ever have a chance to attend or participate in one of Gary's labs, it's not to be missed. It's like life-changing. Valerie Creighton.
Thank you.
From the Canadian Media Fund.
I'm from the Wow.
Somebody got money. Somebody got money or wants money, yes.
So I have the privilege of serving as the President and CEO of the Canada Media Fund. Been there for 8 years. All the rest of my bio is in the program. I don't need to run that through with you, except to say it's very long, very embarrassing. And with a bio like that, I shouldn't have snags in my tights, but I do. Been on the road a long time. So the Canada Media Fund, I was privileged to go through the first transition when we outsourced all of the program management to Telefilm Canada. And the second transition was even more interesting when in 2009 we got the mandate from the Minister of Canadian Heritage to have all of the content funded by the new Canada Media Fund have more than one platform as it came into the application stage. So it was a very shock wave to the country. Pretty much everybody was against it, right from our funders right down to the unions and guilds. Nobody wanted to do it. Big fight, conflict between the traditional TV producers, broadcasters, and the transmedia universe. And we spent a year talking to everybody across the country to figure out what to do, and isolated 13 major policy initiatives that we thought would launch this new entity. And at the end of the day, was everybody happy? No. Was there consensus? Absolutely not. But people went along with us. And I think what we discovered in that process, while the two universes were perhaps in solitude, when people came into the room together, they very much realized they all had one thing in common, which was the making of great, compelling content. So it was a very successful dialogue with the industry across the country. We launched, and 3 years later, we're still here and have some very interesting results.
Okay, and we have a 1 minute video, so. Canada. Okay, Michel Reilhac.
Hello, I used to have a regular job as commissioning editor for cinema at Arte in France. It's a French cultural channel, French and German. I gave that up, if I can have my first slide. I gave that up a year ago because I felt that we needed to move on from providing content for passive viewers to working on the tools that we have for storytelling, triggering the imagination in all kinds of new ways, using interactive methods to trigger the imagination and transform the way we behave towards content from passive to active, and exploring these ways that we are exploring now as a tribe of transmedia storytellers, to see how we can make stuff not only for people, but with people. And since then, now for a year, I've decided to label myself temporarily as a story architect, and working on developing my own projects with my own company, and consulting and coaching traditional linear filmmakers and film producers on the new path of interactive storytelling.
Merci.
De rien.
Andra Sheffer from the Bell Fund, yes?
Right.
It's shorthand, right?
Very short. The Bell Broadcast and Media Fund. I'm the executive director. The Bell Fund has been around since 1997, and Bell TV, the satellite and cable provider, fund the fund. So it's a private fund with private money mandated by the CRTC, government mandate to do this kind of funding. But the Bell Fund has, since 1997, invested over $130 million in 1,300 projects, all of which has to be cross-platform. So we are funding projects that have a television component as well as some kind of interactive digital media enhancement or extension to it. So we've had a lot of experience with cross-platform emerging media projects, and hopefully we'll be able to continue doing that for a long time.
And you have a 1-minute video?
I do.
That was fun. So,
Should have like
Yeah, we should dance.
and Annika Gustafson.
ja.
Ja, välkomna. Here from Boost in Sweden.
Yes, I
And
am.
half Canadian, half Swedish.
Yeah, kind of ish. I'm the poor Swedish cousin. I decided to go entirely analog in my presentation. Because analog never fails, right? I had BoostHbg.
Well, it does if you're on crack, as illustrated by Toronto, but go
I'm
ahead.
sincerely sorry. That's one of the best lines I've ever heard on TV from him yesterday.
You know, just as an aside, I
you
really
hear
get
that one?
Canada. I really get Canada. We were, Catherine Winkler was bringing me in from the airport. In the United States, when a bus is out of service, it just says out of service. This said, sorry, out of service.
There we go. short about me, I spent 15 years in Montreal, and I was actually there in 2010 when CMF came, and I had to go. Did you go to those work camps that Telefilm organized when you went for 1 week from 9 in the morning to 11 at night? Indoctrination camps? So they were brilliant.
Where were those?
We had them in Montreal. Like they all kept giving French and English and French again and English. I did all of them. It was a lot of fun. I moved back to Sweden. I became the Nordic country's first transmedia commissioner, which is like a very funny title to have because nobody knew what that was and nobody knew what I did. So I could do whatever I wanted, which is a fantastic situation to be in. Now I'm heading BoostHbg, which is the only center in Sweden developing and funding transmedia projects. I have a little flyer with me here. In English for you, so you can come to me or leave them outside. I was very happy to find this in the lobby yesterday. This is our film that we financed that got the award in Venice for Best Audience Award in a 2 minutes and 37-second long standing ovation. Our contribution to the Oscars. Go see it. It's called Eat, Sleep, Die. So we do film too. We are involved in a partnership with Denmark because in the Nordic countries we like collaborating. And a hot tip to you, if you want to collaborate with one Nordic country, invite another one too. Do a threesome and you have access to way more money.
And the Germans.
You can do the Germans too, but that kind of gets complicated.
The Germans and the Scandinavians. Yes, because you know what? Those Germans march right through Scandinavian production. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's not get into that.
I had to pay for that comment.
No, but Swedes are very friendly. We open up our trains for free, but let's not go into that history. I'm ashamed of it still. They took Norway instead of Sweden, if you know history. Anyways, we're doing SWIM, which is called Scandinavian World of Innovative Media. And the reason we call it SWIM is between southern Sweden and eastern Denmark, we have water. So we have this we're trying to swim across a bridge. We have this beautiful money from Europe called Interreg money, if you're two regions collaborating. It's shortly, we're developing 10 transmedia projects. They're pitching at Copenhagen Docs Festival next week. We have a huge conference there for 2 days, and we're going to have it next year too, analog flyers. SWIM, you sit very far away, but you can come closer. That's another thing too, why do everybody always sit in the back when we're in the front? But this is what we're doing, and we are here also to find Canadian friends and co-producers. We have 3 teams pitching. They're there in kind of morose pictures. You see the Scandinavian looks right there? But they're awesome people, okay? So they're all pitching tomorrow.
Okay, going backwards. Twitter handle, please.
Annika's Shit Chat.
Chit chat.
Shit Chat.
Yeah, there's that Swedish accent that makes it sound like shit chat. So
It is like
shit chat.
It is Shit Chat.
Okay. Twitter.
Andra Sheffer.
Michel Reilhac.
CMF, I believe. I don't know what it is. I don't Twitter. I don't, very rarely. I just, between 450 emails a day, I'm not on Facebook either. And if I did have a Twitter account, I'd be in jail because I wouldn't be able to be quiet about the things I really feel.
Oh, dear. Okay,
So-
no funding for Twitter storytelling.
No, there's lots of funding for Twitter stuff at the CMF. It's just I personally allow others to do it, and I stay safe and out of jail.
There you go.
And I'm Gary P. Hayes, and nearly at 40,000, so
Oh,
perhaps
hey,
you guys
maybe I'll
can-
get one.
can
I
too.
tell you, follow Gary, you will learn a lot from the obvious to the not so obvious to the totally
not
obscure.
quite Avatar. But.
So, yes. And I'm at Brian Seth Hurst. Okay, I want to frame the context for this. 1, we're talking global, so produce locally or co-produce locally, distribute globally. We're talking multi-platform. We're talking ultimate commercialization. For a property to be successful over time and sustainable, ultimate commercialization. What I want to do really quickly, before I throw out the challenge to you, is run through each of the traditional funding models. Valerie, you talked a little about how it's working. I'm sure the audience has an experience of what it is to apply for Canadian funding, so we don't have to go into that. But just let's say how it's done, the differences between commercial funding in your regions and government funding, and how it's done now. Gary.
Australia is very similar to Canada, and I think there's actually a bunch of people going over to Australia to sort of hopefully match or set up some ties there. But it's, Australia is a handout type funding nation, much the same as Canada. There's a sense of entitlement for a lot of producers there who go for the government funding initiatives, and I think it's the same that you have the national funding for multi-platform, which is through Screen Australia, and then there's the state agencies as well who offer funding if you're obviously working in that specific state. So nothing new there, and I'll go into detail of some of those funds in a second. But of course, Australia being a commercial entity as well, with 3 big commercial free-to-air broadcasters, and obviously pay TV channels and several large advertising agencies, has the traditional models of commercial brand funding, advertising funding, as well as a pretty healthy angel and VC investment community there as well for funding multi-platform content. The public service broadcasters, ABC and SBS, they also fund multi-platform projects. So I was executive producer for multi-platform at ABC for a year, and through the commissioning genre owners at the ABC, multi-platform came through fiction, factual, or entertainment properties. It wasn't funded directly from the multi-platform department. It had to be attached to a specific
linear program.
A linear program. And also that's where the interesting models started to appear as well, because as well as the broadcaster funding, it really had to be hand in hand with the government funding as well. So most of the projects that come into broadcasters are often government funded alongside the commission.
So it's kind of a startup and then it takes over in a commercial. I want to ask you just if you could give us ballpark of the percentage of commercial success, projects that have moved on from government funding into the commercial environment and were sustainable. Is there a number in your head that you would?
Well, I would say it's increasing. Screen Australia publish projects that they funded and the ones that become successful. And I noticed you guys, the Bell and Canada Media Fund, were quoting thousands of projects. And the same as Screen Australia, the thousands of projects have gone through the national and stateside funding. In terms of percentage, I would say more than half now are sustainable. In other words, they've gone into production, they've reached users, and it's being used. Part of the problem, though, is the definition. Screen Australia, for example, have split the multi-platform funding into 3 different blocks now. There's 20 million available for games, spread over 3 years. It's about 5 million a year. So that's very tightly defined, social through to console games. It's not a lot of money. As you know, a game costs about 25 mil. So each of the projects funded get around about $500,000 each to get going. That often has to be in tandem with private investment, commercial investment through the agency itself. The second area that they're funding is multi-platform drama. This is a new one, which is very specific. And I think, perhaps we should talk more about the...
Well, we don't have time to talk more, because we have to run through. So
I'll finish quick with them. So multi-platform drama, that's really sort of webisodes, series on the web, combined with YouTube. We've just announced yesterday that Screen Australia and YouTube are putting another $500,000 into YouTube-specific drama. And then the third area that's funded is interactive documentaries, and that's around about $3-4 million a year for traditional, I suppose, broadcast interactive type things. But in answer to your question, yeah, and it may be that I'm interested in the Canadian model, is government funding going into projects that then become commercial and have sustainable in itself. This whole issue of taxpayers' money funding commercial.
Well, and also having a return on the investment. Okay, we're going to jump to Valerie.
Sorry.
So there are 2 ways, as you know, most of you do know. There's a component of what we call the convergent stream, which is the lion's share of the money, and it's primarily television content with another format application associated with it. But we also have the experimental stream, which is about 37 million now, and for that content you do not have to have any association with a traditional broadcaster. I think the issue for the fund is we have two sources. One is, as you say, the soft money outright grant. But in the experimental stream, it's all equity investment. And that was purposeful because part of it was if there's a huge win, which we hope there will be, and there's some indication that may happen, then it would look pretty silly if we didn't have any participation in that at all. Now, our interest is in getting the money back that we invest. It's not in making a huge profit margin. We believe that is rightly placed with the production company. So we see very much the fund and that piece in particularly as kind of the startup high-risk money and want to trigger other investment.
And how long has that been going on?
3 years. The 3 years
okay.
since the fund was launched.
And if you could throw out a return on the investment?
Well, I can't, Gary, because I think it's also, what is return on investment? Are you talking pure money? It's probably really low. Are you talking about development of an industry and a whole sector? It's probably pretty high. And I want to just throw out there, what's the return on investment on the television side? And what has it been for over 40 years, if you really look down deep and hard? So I think what we're seeing at the fund is there's a few companies that have been bought outright by others with a lot of money, with a lot of interest. We're seeing some good successes out of the experimental stream. I just did the presentation at MIP, which focused on our kids genres, which there's some very interesting successes there. And I think it's starting to happen. But those projects have only, they started 3 years ago. Some of them are just coming into the market now. So it takes a while. And I mean, what we've seen in the early stages is we're very optimistic that we're getting some very interesting stuff out of that experimental stream in particular. And its commercial success, I think, is possible. But it's the type of business, just like anything in this country, whether you're talking oil and gas or agriculture, to say, well, we want this to be completely sustainable is nonsense. I mean, we're a country of 30 million people. Most of our large businesses and corporations don't, without some type of investment or support.
But the truth is, at least from my point of view, that this eye towards, regardless of what you say, this eye towards commercialization and a return, and maybe the financial return isn't the only measure of success.
Right.
But that is a sustainable model that you are now trying to build. So there is sustainability in that.
And there's two initiatives we have right now recognizing that we can't do it all. We're only part of the piece. And one of them is a digital media co-production framework that we've launched with the Bell Fund and others to try to increase the whole co-production aspect for producers here. But the other really interesting one that just happened a couple of weeks ago is the A3P, and it's an accelerator program where we've interviewed 11 accelerators across the country, and then our producers in this sector will be able to work with those ideas and boost and accelerator programs to start to actually develop those projects so that hopefully...
Still with an equity
an equity component, and hopefully VenCap or others will start to come in as a result of that development. So, I think ours in a nutshell would be the kickstarting, the high risk, the first money in, and we're trying to build that environment to allow a higher level of commercialization and sustainability.
And there are commercial partners that will come in with you.
There have been.
So it's a collaboration between the government and commercial partners. Okay.
I would say so. That's a good way to describe it.
Michel, I have to keep moving, Gary, I know. We're covering regions, and we've got a fun exercise. So.
Very quickly, in France, the financing system for cross-platform content is still very siloed. It's public money is available for new media content at the National Film Center, and it is a separate department from obviously the departments where you can access money for TV content or cinema content. And in the broadcasters, in all the broadcasters in France now, there's a web content department that you can access money also mostly for development. The average amount of money that is available through these different channels in the different French broadcasters is on an average of about 60,000 euros for development and possibly up to 120,000, 130,000 euros for production. But most of these web departments in the broadcasters are hinge on traditional linear content. Few projects are actually supported that have multi-platform architecture without a traditional linear content. That being said, games and apps can apply and can be funded through the same fund. Unlike Australia, we don't have that distinction between three different types of categories. It's all the same. The regional funds that have money available for financing into traditional film production are all opening a transmedia fund. Some of them, like in the northern region of France, for instance, which is the first one that has opened about 3 years ago, can now be associated with financing from Belgium. And Switzerland is about to open its own French-speaking transmedia content fund very soon. So there is ways to access both national funds with the broadcasters or the National Film Center, and also regional funds. In order for you to access those funds, you have to partner with a French-based production company. Obviously, I think it's the same for Canada and probably the same for Australia. But it's a very, our system is very open to international co-productions. It's been the case in traditional independent cinema, and that model is being reproduced
And
in
television
the
too. I mean, Joe
Yes.
was Jean Reno is a perfect example of international co-production, and requiring certain actors to be from certain countries is the percentage
Yeah,
of
it's
them.
always it's a points system that applies almost everywhere, where according to the nationalities of the people involved in the making of the project, you acquire a certain number of points, and in order to access the highest level of financing, you need to have a certain level of points.
It would have been great to be able to discuss The Spiral as a case study for collaboration on multi-platform, because it was Norway, Belgium, France, Germany. So that's something that you can look at on your own. It's called The Spiral.
Yes.
It's interesting. Okay, a different,
the one that
reasonably successful for what they, but a monumental task for Peter DeMag.
That's the one you mentioned in your opening remark that had 16 different co-producers.
No, that was something different, but
But
that did
one
too.
had also, I
Yes.
think, even maybe more than.
Yeah, I was
than
really
that.
surprised that the producers' heads didn't explode. So, Andra.
The Bell Fund, the investments are in the form of grants, and we have about 8 different granting programs, so I won't go through all of them, but basically we provide about 75% of the costs of production, up to a maximum of $250,000. So there's some significant money there. We've always had grants because we knew that this was a struggling business. And we do keep track, though, of returns. We do ask all the producers to report to us. And it is very low. The return on investment as far as financial numbers go is in low percentages, and it comes mainly from licensing of the digital content along with the television program, internationally. But the best return is, again, for the kids stuff, and it's in the area of apps. That's where we're seeing real returns. There are a couple of children's apps that have almost made their money back, which is really a big breakthrough. So that's the status of the Bell Fund financing, and all the details are on our website at bellfund.ca.
Thank you. Annika.
I'll just do a quick one of the 5 Nordic countries because it's just good to know. And Denmark and Norway are financing not only film but transmedia all the ways to games and game development, was really good to know. Norway has a shitload of money because they've got oil and no national debt. They're also like our Newfies, so you can get away with a lot of stuff. In Sweden, we do finance, the Film Institute finance transmedia since this 1st of January this year, but they were not given any new money into the budget, so the money comes from film, which means that they hardly give out anything. We are in a frustrating position. We are one of the earliest adopters of the internet platforms. We have the most devices per capita, the most use, blah, 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 and our structure is dinosaur. We have a couple of really big people blocking the door. We're waiting for them to die. I'm serious. We have one important commissioner that says he doesn't believe in transmedia because the CD-ROM flopped. Not kidding you guys, but that's what I'm dealing with on some levels.
Well, we're all very happy that we're not you. Continue.
I hear your dollar numbers here and I'm crying. if you want to collaborate with us or with Swim, you need to have a partner in southern Sweden or in eastern Denmark. But we're very open for cooperation. We really, really would like to meet friends over here, and that's why we're here. And the other thing that we do is we collaborate a lot with universities. They have funding. One of my best tips in transmedia and what we're trying to do, find a researcher that's interested in the topic you're interested in and go via them. We have one project that got $2.5 million for what they're doing, which is called Living Archives. It's a way of finding archives and make interactivity with archives and using them. So there's like a lot of funding possibilities to be explored, or the simple things of just getting a PhD student involved in your topic, particularly if you do documentaries, that will do part of the work for you and can find additional funding to research things.
Yeah.
So.
We actually have commercial projects coming out of the universities.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
by the students.
And another thing that we do have in Sweden is called the Culture Bridge, and it's a new initiative where basically you can apply for money, but you have to match find dollar for dollar with private investment, so no government funding is counted. And this is actually the government's sneaky way to try to teach people to think commercially in a socialistic system that has been socialistic and that is changing, and where they're trying, eventually the grant money will go. I think we all know that. So they're in a soft way, they're training people to actually go and look for money in other places, which I think is a really good exercise.
I find it really interesting that as far as co-production goes and as far as commercialization goes and as far as new ground, I mean, you had The Killing and you had Lillehammer,
Yeah.
and it continues to that model of commercial funding for television, that now they're actually starting to look at the commercial funding in terms of multi-platform and interactivity. I just want to provide the US context. Yes, we have a huge market, but there are things that didn't come up here, maybe because you're government funded. One was the difference between marketing dollars and production dollars, and what that means, and the role that brands can play in terms of funding different aspects of different activities in the audience. And then none of us talked about data. We didn't talk about the value of data. So I would like you to consider those things. I want us all to move out of our comfort zone for a second. And because you talked about international sales is where your money comes from, and we live in a global environment now, and whether those shows are repurposed in another language or whether they're multilingual, which is starting to happen as well with subtitles and things like that and translation devices. So what I'm going to do now, this is the context, okay. One, the future of government funding in the project I'm about to mention, considering your own areas. Two, deficit financing models, which you kind of address because you take equity stake. And we all know that the kind of the traditional international television sales model isn't going anywhere really fast. So think of rolling this into that. I said marketing money, rights and franchising. In other words, if you've got this property, how can the rights be exploited in different countries in different ways if you're building a global property? The role of brands, from sponsorship and possibly branded entertainment. The role of new distributors, multi-channel networks. You talked about YouTube, and what is that? Okay. You ready? Okay. This is the show. It is called Rapture. It is a fully developed technical society that rests in the deepest part of Africa under the Kalahari Desert. Though the civilization is beneath the ground, members of the society walk among us in every area and strata of life, from the untouchables of India to the ranks of the rich in the United Kingdom, and are in every country in the world. They are far advanced beyond our own technology, aware of our world, our challenges, our intelligence, and our flaws. They can affect it with their technology to a staggering extent. And now they are about to change the world in ways unimaginable, for better or worse. Why are they here? There is one person, a very unlikely hero, who has made it his mission to find out. This is beginning, the pitch for this story world is beginning as a 1-hour drama series. It is not a limited 6-episode series, it is 13 episodes. The producers are planning extended seeding of the mythology ahead of time through content, social media, underground promotions. They are looking towards global international co-production and sales. There is talent that is well known, that is associated. It has not been, in terms of writers and producers, it has not been sold to a broadcaster yet or a distributor. You are the packager. How will you fund this? Let's start with Annika.
You're going to start with me. I have one question for you here back. The filmmakers, what's their ultimate goal of making this film? What do they want? Really?
They want to change the world.
They want to change the world.
They want this to be a global movement. They want to bring certain things to attention. They want to engage people through story. And yes, they want to make money.
All right.
What's the key messages? I'm just
Yeah,
following
exactly.
on from that.
To change the world. To change the world in what sense?
In what way?
Okay,
Yeah.
so the idea is that, when you think of what Facebook is doing and the transparency and the authenticity and the ability to bring things to attention, that once things are brought up and they're transparent, like crack cocaine in Toronto, that then the next thing is action, and what are those actions to be taken?
And
And the demographic, by the way, is what you would think of. It's kind of like the Avatar demographic that Kathy presented, which was 40%, 47% female, 52% male, and I would say the age range is probably can go anywhere from 14, the fanboy mentality, up to 25, 35. I mean, what we've discovered personally is we thought we were adjusting fanboys in our fan base for Conspiracy for Good is in their mid-50s.
And they want to
well.
save the world and make us all collaborate and everything's going to be beautiful. That's
I don't think everything's going to be beautiful. They are a commercial business proposition.
good. Well, first of all, I would actually go to the university that I work with. We should take this one down, Medea. They're doing research into all these kind of ways of how to engage people to do things together. And that's where we got a lot of money from. Like, if anybody's interested in these kind of projects, I have fantastic connections there. The other way, what you should do, I mean, it's a typical thing. Get a Norwegian on board, they have money. Get a Swede on board because you can work with us. You get the Nordic Film and TV Fund on that base. All the Nordic film public TV would be interested in a property like this because we are all holy and we come from this. We think we're important and can change the world in the Nordic countries. That's the first thing. And as for building, you want to build a community as well, people globally.
Correct. You
right?
got it.
I think it's a very good way to start in Sweden because we are very socially media engaged and wants to do things. We have several production companies that are actually focusing entirely on these things.
Great.
Yeah.
The idea is that each of you are going to have a different perspective, so that's great. And then in the end, we may have answered something, we may not. Andra.
Well, I guess we have to face a few realities with this project. To get any Canadian funding, it's going to have a Canadian producer as one of the producing partners. It could be an international co-production, but at least the Canadian producer.
Remember, I just want to say, remember the source of this property is your own country.
Okay.
It's starting in your own
Okay, so
country.
Okay, I
then
missed
the
out on
next
the way.
problem, therefore, would be it's not about a Canadian topic. So I think maybe CMF might have some problems and the Canadian broadcasters might have problems because they'd like to have Canadian topics. But let's assume that the hero is Canadian, and then the project could qualify as Canadian. The next step would be to find a Canadian broadcaster because all of our money is more or less tied into a trigger by a Canadian broadcaster. So the team would have to pitch it, get a Canadian broadcaster. Let's assume that they're actually successful in getting a Canadian broadcaster. They can then come to the various funds for funding as we are now operating. So they could come to the Bell Fund, for example, with many components of that the television component would be eligible for some funding as long as it is approved for some kind of digital component. So in this case, of course, there could be a million different things done online that are interactive activities. Far beyond, there could be a web series, but there could also be games and activities and research and all sorts of other things, which would all make it qualify for the Bell Fund funding, and I believe also for CMF. I think we would love to see sponsors in this. It's perfect for branded entertainment. There's all sorts of the little pun on underground. They were living underground, and we can use some underground economy things. I think that's good. I like that one. So we're very open to having funding partners of any kind. No problem with sponsorship and branding. In fact, let me just take this 1 second to do the plug for the new branded entertainment white paper that came out that the CMF and us and a couple of others have also sponsored for the CMPA that Catherine Tate did. I highly recommend it. It's being launched, I think, in a few minutes. It'll be online, and it's the first of 3 papers to explain how the branded entertainment and how branding can work, and it's got a lot of good information in it to get us all started understanding that.
The one question I have, and maybe this will come, same question to you, is why wouldn't you look out to a company like Red Arrow International that has production companies all over the world that is able to put together co-productions. They did the Borgias. They actually did do Joe with Jean Reno. Why wouldn't you look outside of Canada to put something together like that?
Do you want me to jump in?
Well,
Or do
either
you
one of you.
is
Go
Andrew
ahead.
finished?
Go ahead.
Well, you asked us, we're the person in charge of this. Packaging.
Correct.
Okay, so if I'm the producer in Canada doing this, because I'm assuming I am the Canadian producer, as you just said, that helps explain it. Absolutely, that's what I would do. I mean, this is a terrific project. I think it absolutely fits the mandate of the CMF. It's about rapture. What country is more rapturous in the world than Canada? You have an underground society that you
True
can be
patriot
built.
love.
It's relevant to anybody all over the world. I would absolutely find truly strong international co-producers in virtually every country, because it could apply underground anywhere. Red Arrow is one example. If I'm the production company I'm thinking of in Canada, I have a lot of experience in 1-hour dramatic series. I know exactly which broadcaster to go to get interested in this content and therefore qualify for all the funds. I know exactly which international producers to go to, and they in turn will know who to go to in their countries. So suddenly you're looking at a lot of money for this. Branded entertainment, for sure, as Andra said, this is the kind of project that's perfect for it. You can just think about the environmental issues, the spiritual issues, the energy issues, because we're talking, as we were early this morning, about the earth and energy and how movements start to grow, and then you apply it through to social media or games or however you want to look at it. This project actually might have the possibility to save the world. It's very interesting when you think about taking something from under the ground and bringing it above, and all the applications that you would use to that. So I think it's eminently financeable.
Michel.
I would definitely recommend to work on developing further the project on the basis of two concepts, two notions that you identified. One is desert and the other one is underground. I would look out and see how the story could create a network of contacts in major countries all over the world that have major deserts, and make this story be the vehicle for, like you said, a much deeper issue, which is desertification, global warming, and tapping into underground resources. If these people have been able to live under the Kalahari Desert for so long, they have been tapping into the water table under the desert. And there is lots of water under all deserts. It's a wealth that we can tap into, but it's also a perishable resource. So I would definitely agree with what you just said, Valerie, that the idea that this fiction, the vehicle, becomes a way to raise awareness around issues of deserts expanding and what can be done about that and how do you react to that would be, to me, an interesting way to then connect with financing from both documentary funding sources as well as humanitarian and NGOs that could be carefully chosen for that, as well as from the traditional broadcaster fiction financing. I would definitely, because this would be a costly project. It has to be ambitious.
Well, frankly, I never do.
No, but what I'm saying, I mean, you're asking us to play the part in France. We do a lot of like independent, projects, and this would be a commercial project. And it would have to have a widely international appeal if it taps into those big issues, which it seems to have the potential for. So that's what I would do right away, is explore the potential behind the fiction.
Oh, I forgot to say that the main assumption is that it's a great story, which you obviously got.
Would you
Gary.
like to start a company and we can develop and produce this?
Yeah, I have one.
Oh,
Come
okay,
and
let's-
yeah.
I was just thinking that. So just in full disclosure, I mean, I ran this by Alison Norrington before I decided to do it, but I said, I've got to come up with a project for these people, so this like came off the top
Can
of
I-
my head at like midnight.
Can I just say one more thing? I think that I'll be talking about this tomorrow, but I think there's a strong taste of going back to reality, to physical reality now. And this has a very interesting potential for seeding signs in the real world, in chosen deserts, showing that maybe there's an underground connecting network between the different deserts that you can travel and go from one to the other, because desert culture is a culture in itself, and you find the same kinds of behaviors in the Sahara, in the Kalahari.
And in the context of the story, and when I get to Gary, because we're running out of time, in the context of the story, who are these people that are living under there? Where did they come from? And why did they choose to live under the Kalahari
And what
Desert?
is their connection with the people that live above ground? They may be depending upon the Tuaregs and the,
So how much are you selling the
season
rights
one,
for?
season 1 through 5.
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
How much are you selling the rights for?
We'll talk.
The deal.
I just, because I know Gary, that's why I saved Gary for last, because I know, I so respect Gary's mind. And when you look at the resource that you have here, so what we did was we threw an idea. It's no different than you going in and having a pitch. But it's my contention that if you're a storyteller today, you must also be a business person. And you must also be thinking of the ways that this could be financed, of the ways that brands could integrate, of the ways that governments or local governments who have a water problem or whatever. So when you're thinking, and I'm not saying every story you tell has to have a social component to it, but every story you tell, your prime motivation is to move the audience. So, did you have a...
No. Do you want to add to?
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking, we should mention the Good Pitch and Sundance and BritTalks in terms of for having the help to find organizations. But we also work away because we have little funding and we have to think very smart with what we're doing. And it's really like, figure out who's got a problem with the area you want to make a film about. Who's got these issues? And come with them to your project in the sense, I can solve this issue.
Well, and there's also a whole bunch of data that you can get ahead of time, which is a complete different discussion.
Yeah.
So why I saved Gary for last is because I participated in Gary's lab. Filmmakers came in, brilliant filmmakers, who knew nothing about multi-platform, knew nothing about the business models, and within 5 days walked out as experts. So basically, you seeded the kind of brainstorming that would respond to this kind of content. So now you know the property, what would you do?
Well, I mean, I brought in fabulous mentors like yourself and others, and we worked together as a team to nurture and to increase their skills in the area. But this particular project, this subterranean social benefit storytelling, which is a good term I just invented.
He's joking.
Yes. I mean, it sounds very similar to sort of the conspiracy for good. It has that sort of intention behind it. So the process, and I think, it's mentioned already that certainly we go through in StoryLabs, is to really focus on the intention and the passion behind the project. What is it you want to achieve, the messages, to then identify the key hooks that you can start to hang various things on. In the story world, how can you expand it, and then start to attach the key issues and how you may find government partners involved to draw on the right broadcasters and so on. But the key thing, the key message that we always do in the labs now is really, particularly for original IP, is how you're going to, make this story work in across various media platforms, and that's all about building the community for original IP. Avatar is the other end of the spectrum, but the spectrum that most independent producers and filmmakers are working in is that this is a story that no one knows about, and so on. So that a lot of the strategies early on, I think, before you start to think about how this is going to be financed, is to grow an audience around the property. And that's all about, various forms of social media storytelling and involvement and seeding fragments of story into
And the
across social
producers
media.
obviously intended to do that. But
a lot of sweat equity early on, just to start that going, potentially to get some early private investment, and you can, if you've got a good pitch and you can pull the environmental issues out of this and various other things to do with deserts and so on, then potentially you can go to some government agencies and educational institutions to get some early seed funding to then start to build the strategy towards proper commercial funding.
What's really interesting is that, the combination of these strategies, so this is more bottom-up, more top-down, that there's a combination of these strategies. I've been told we have 5 minutes left. In that 5 minutes, I would love a word of wisdom from you to storytellers who are looking at multi-platform, who are looking at story worlding, because that's really what we're living in, story architecture, story worlding. What would you tell a storyteller today that would help them move forward in getting their stories out into the world and manifesting their intentions?
I tend to ask them to take a step back in order to move forward, because they come to us, they want to do everything, right? And we spend the time really on the core. What is this really about? And why are you doing it? What's your personal drive? Somebody just want to tell a good story. It could be about a desertification problem, but I just want to tell a good story. Or I want to change the world and I want to solve this. It's really important that the creators know both what the story is about and their own personal because why, as I call it. And once you have that core down and you kind of feel that, it can start grow organically. But you can never start thinking about these different platforms. I'm going to do the game, I'm going to do that. It's like
Totally agree.
F all of it, right? And back down to that thing. And when you have that core with you, that's when we see really interesting, I hate the word organic, but things start to happen organically.
But also, it's efficient.
And it's also this
Financially
thing,
efficient.
we work a lot with this, like who's got a problem in the area you're into, and think, and for example, we have a project with suicide and teenagers, which is a huge problem in Sweden, right? The local transportation agencies, the train departments, the kids that kill themselves in front of the trains, that's their problem. They're going to come into the project now because they can't solve what's happening in front of the trains.
Because they need story
because
to solve it.
They're just a train company.
And they need story to solve it.
And they don't know what to do, but we have a project like that, so they're going to come in.
Great.
And so
Andra.
on.
There are so many fantastic digital opportunities right now. I would really encourage producers to take advantage of things like your project. Start off doing it online as a web series. Prove that there is an audience for it. Show what it looks like. Demonstrate the performances, what the storyline will be. You can do it for very little money. You don't have to go and get broadcasters. You don't have to do a whole bunch of things. But take advantage of an aspect of it to prove your concept will work. Make sure that's a hit online, and then you can take off from there and do all the other wonderful things you want to do.
Michel.
I would use the word that you used, organic, but not in an intuitive sense, but analyze the story you want to tell and see what organically makes sense. Mm-hmm. Don't think platforms first, think story first. The second, think of yourself not as a filmmaker, but as a storyteller. Mm-hmm. And by changing the paradigm, you open yourself to potentially using anything as a platform. And last, I would recommend to be simple, to be as simple as possible, because one of the biggest turnoff for a user experience, and that prevents it from engaging, is when you have to fight through the technological interface that is too clumsy, too complicated. It has to be intuitive and simple in every way.
My God, do you realize what great advice we're getting here? Okay, Valerie.
I would, obviously, it's been emphasized story first, but I think depending where you are and at what stage in your career, I would try to move your ego off thinking this is the best thing anybody's ever thought of or been written, because there really isn't a new story. And depending what the content is, similar to what others have said, I would actually look to, once I've zeroed in on the compellingness of the story, the very best partners I could find. Because while you might be the driver, you may find others who, depending where, if you're an emerging producer, have more knowledge, more experience, more access to money, that you can help you not only refine your vision, but actually get it made. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want to do, is get it made in front of every eyeball you can. So I would get the ego out of the way, focus on the work, and find the best people out there to help you realize that vision.
Gary.
I would advise independent producers to build trust. There's a great quote, "To be trusted is a greater compliment than being loved," by George MacDonald, who said that. And I really think trust is what it's all about nowadays, which is, trusted by your audience to build trust. And that means nurturing your community. To following on from Kathy Franklin, who was talking a lot about authenticity. Authenticity and trust, to me, are part of the same thing. So it's not just that emotional attachment, it's actually a lot more that you need to nurture in your community as a producer.
Wow, we actually are ending on time. Well, maybe not.
Can I add a little thing, which if I remember it, just with my test early. Filmmakers have a tendency to work on their scripts alone forever and not show the film until it's finished and spend a lot of time and nobody can see it's me, I, and my film. You have to open up. If this is a design process, who it's for, what do I want them to do? And you need to test early instead of sitting at home thinking about what you think they should do. Go out and find the audience, test with
And
them.
that's proof of concepts,
Be with them.
testing prototypes.
Do it
and so on,
early,
yeah.
very early.
Process.
Think gaming industry, they test things really, really early. And that's a major shift I think filmmakers have to do.
Well, and also in
And
digital,
what-
you'll find out what works fast.
yeah, and what
don't
you
be-
said to not think about themselves as filmmakers, but storytellers or story architects. This is what you are. So open up the process.
And the direct consequence
Yeah.
of this is don't be afraid to fail quick and small. It's always better than waiting to fail big.
So we say fail fast forward. That's what
Yeah.
Ingrid Kopp says at Tribeca.
Annika, Andra, Michel, Valerie, Gary, thank you. You folks have been great today, and I think hopefully you got a lot of valuable information. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Merging Media.